Coping with Tre Tailor, giving you info and advice to help you thrive and survive in life, because we'll always be coping with something. Coping. Hey there, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on Coping. I'm Tre Tailor. We're giving you info and advice to help you thrive and survive in life, because we will always be coping with something. Today, we're coping with change. Attorney Tameika Isaac Devine joins us, the former 20-year city councilwoman for the city of Columbia, South Carolina, former mayoral candidate, will share with us about the past year and how she has shifted after everything that has happened in her life. Tameika, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here with you on Coping.
Thank you. Thank you so much always for your support. We're looking forward to a great conversation. We're going to talk with Tameika coming up next. But first, check the scroll at the bottom of the screen for resources concerning COVID vaccines, testing, financial resources, also jobs, housing, and also other financial information, how to pay your bills, information on scholarships and several community events, not only in Columbia, but in South Carolina in general. Also, we are streaming live on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, soon to be podcasting, and we're believing God for some other things too. So please post and share this information so we can get the message to the masses. Today, we are coping with change. Attorney Tameika Isaac Devine joins us after being a city councilwoman for the city of Columbia, South Carolina for 20 years. She ran for mayor and then looked up at the end of that race, trying to realized that the first half of her life was going to be a little different from the rest of her life, as she did so many years as a public servant. So, change, Tameika, first of all, thank you again so much for joining us for this very personal conversation. And thank you for saying yes to being so transparent, because change is inevitable. But sometimes, with change comes disappointments, confusion, and times that we say, really, God?
And people say that, that there's a saying that life is what happens when you're making plans.
Yes.
And it's like, you might have a plan, but God always says different. Not always, but sometimes it's different, and you just gotta trust it.
Yeah, and you know what? He may say yes, but his yes is going to look different than our yes.
Exactly.
And I know, because, I know that you are a woman of God. I know you are a prayer and you look to God, and your pastor. So tell me about what made you first. Let's talk about you choosing public office I guess now it's 21 years ago.
Yeah, no, I guess 22 years ago. First, excuse me, I first ran I started running in 2021, in the fall of 2021. So yeah, but I'll tell you, I honestly never really planned to be a public servant. I always wanted to be an attorney. So, being a lawyer was always in my plan, and I worked really hard on that. But I've always also been very involved in the community. My parents were community folks. My dad grew up here in Columbia, and so Columbia is home for me. My dad loved this city. I mean, you hear stories about, going to W.A. Perry and C.A. Johnson. And then, when he had a family, this is the only place he wanted to raise his kids. And so growing up, Columbia, we were always involved in the community. My mom is a Delta. And so through Delta, through our church, we were always out in the community. So community work wasn't new to me. But I never really thought about that type of service preparing you for public service. Yeah. And what really got me in public service was just, as an attorney, always being interested on how the laws work and how laws, whether it be local level or state or national, how laws can hurt people and how they can help people. And I've always been very interested in how the government is supposed to work for us. And so as an attorney, when I saw things in our community that were not happening the way I felt they should, or the way I felt needed to happen to empower everyone in our community, instead of sitting back and criticizing or complaining or feeling hopeless or frustrated, I felt that I needed to run for office to be part of that solution. And so I chose to run for city council. And the reason I chose city council again was because local government, particularly the city of Columbia, is so much a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And so I chose
And
to
this
run.
was pre-married, pre-kids.
It's pre-married, pre-kids. Yes, it was. And that's why it was a little bit easier back then too, because I didn't have the other responsibilities I have now. But I chose to run for office, and I ran for the at-large council seat, and honestly didn't expect to serve for 20 years. But again, public services is where I am, and I saw the way having good government officials can help work to make the lives of people better. So that's why I did it, and that's why I stayed so long.
Yeah. Was mayor for you a natural progression?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's funny because, and some people watching may remember this, you may remember this, but so I first ran in won in 2002. I served 8 years with Mayor Bob Coble. And then in 2010, Mayor Steve Benjamin, who at the time, was a very good friend. He was in my wedding. I was in his wedding. Right. He's godparents to my children. I'm godparents to his children. So our families were really, really close. And be honest, he came to me and he said, I know that, you have thought about running for mayor, but I would like to run for mayor. And I just wanted to talk to you about that. And, at the time, I had thought about it just because people had mentioned it to me.
Yeah.
But I also really loved what I was doing as an at-large council person, and quite honestly, didn't see a vast difference between council and mayor. Because our city has what we call a council manager form of government, which means that every person, including the mayor, has the same vote. The mayor actually makes a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot more money than the council members have than I would have as a council person, because I was at-large member, was the higher salary, an office at City Hall. But I felt like I could do more. I like the work and not always being out front. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't need to be mayor to actually affect the change I want to in the community.
Right.
So at that time, and of course, and then I prayed on it. My dad was sick at the time. He actually later passed away later on in 2010. And so I was like, no, I'll support my friend that I knew wanted to be mayor and could do a good job. And so I supported him and worked with him over many years as a council person. But I also saw how, as mayor, he was able to really elevate the mayor's position here in the city of Columbia.
And let me interject here. I think, and no disrespect to Mayor Bob, because I think we all feel like Mayor Bob is still the mayor, but Steve really took full advantage of that mayor position. Personally,
projects, I saw how the mayor's office was different than council. As a council member, you have one vote, but you are not the leader of the organization. Right. You are not the person that people call, unless it's a personal connection you have. You're not the person people call or take your call when you want to recruit an Apple store or something else.
Yeah.
So I saw that, how he elevated and showed the way you could work within our form of government, but as mayor, do other things. And so, so when he told me he was planning not to run for re-election, I prayed on it. I always go to God first and talk with my husband, and felt like, I had been very effective as a 20-year council person, but again, didn't expect to serve on council for 20 years. I didn't feel like I just needed to stay on council. I felt like God was opening a door for me to look at how I could better serve my community in a similar and important role, but one that I felt I could do more in leading the city into the next era. And so that's why I ran for mayor. And I have no regrets from my campaign. And I also don't necessarily think that that door is completely closed for me in the future. It just was not God's will at that time.
Right, right. It's so interesting because and we said at the beginning of this interview, God may say yes. And I believe you felt like God said yes, but his timing is not our timing. Maybe it wasn't a straight road to yes. Maybe you had to veer off and go some places and do some different things so that your yes could be more effective. Attorney Tameika Isaac Devine joins us. We're having a open, honest, heart-to-heart conversation about her 20 plus years of serving on city council in Columbia, South Carolina, her run for mayor, and what has happened since then. Tell me about some of the challenges that and maybe even disappointments that you experienced while you were running.
So it's interesting because, and I know we'll get to this as well, part of my therapy, if you will, over the last year has been to recognize that there's a lesson and a blessing in everything. Well, not even just realize it. I realized it then. I always said that. I said it the night of my concession speech, that there was a lesson and a blessing in everything. And so I know that there were lessons and blessings through the campaign. And so part of my therapy has been to place those lessons and blessings in their appropriate place in the past and not dwell on them. And so although there probably were a lot of things that I felt were challenges and disappointments in that time, looking at them in the rearview mirror, I don't necessarily look at them as challenges or disappointments, just the lessons. And so I say that to say that, it's kind of hard now to pull out stuff and say, oh, okay, this was a disappointment or whatever, because I know in my heart that it was the lesson. It wasn't a disappointment. It just might not turn out the way, it was supposed to.
It was disappointing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So with that, looking at it in that context, and clarifying my answer that way, I would say, certainly, and I just said this actually recently, I just interviewed Coroner Nada Rutherford for Women's History Month on a weekly radio show that I do. And we talked about this, that even now, there are still so many challenges for women, particularly Black women, running for office. And even though I had 20 years of service and 100% more experience than anybody else who was in the mayor's race, I had challenges as
that wasn't
the
enough.
only female in the race.
It wasn't enough for someone else. It wasn't enough. It was enough for you. It was enough, I guess, looking at it on paper, but it still wasn't enough.
Yeah. It was challenges. There were things that I dealt with that if I were not a woman, if I were not a Black woman, likely would not have happened.
Do you want to talk about any of them, Tameika?
I promise you this will be an open, honest, and transparent conversation. And so I will be, but I'm not saying this in any judging anyone else or even giving motive to what they may have done or anything else.
You're just being honest. You're just being honest.
I can't speak for other people. But I would say, certainly, I had lots of folks who, even to this day, don't mind picking up the phone and calling me and asking me to help them, to support them, or to do, to even be there for them. And their expectation is that I'll say yes, because I am who I am and everything else.
And you've done it before.
But those same people, when it was time for them to support me, they were not there. They were not there because they didn't want to get involved, or I owe this person this, or well, this person, they're vindictive. And if I don't, do this, and, that's disappointing, especially when you unconditionally support people when they need you. But I also, again, clarifying that and putting it in perspective, I believe those are lessons, because people are not always going to support you.
Mm-hmm.
The folks, people say, just because someone is with you doesn't mean they're for you.
Yeah, wow.
So you can have folks in your circle. You can have people who have eaten at your table, have slept in, your house, that you have given money to. Doesn't mean that when you need them, they're going to be there.
And
even if they tell you they're there, they might not really be there. So you got to be watching what they're doing behind your back.
Right. And you know what? Let me interject here and say that may not necessarily make them a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got to separate, and what you said was so huge. We've got to separate who people are from what they may be comfortable doing. They may be a good person. They may even be a good friend to you or a good family member, but they just can't do everything you need them to do or we expect them to do.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, that's my lesson on that. I feel like, those are the lessons you needed to know, because sometimes we blindly expect things from people, or we blindly support people, and you realize that, that might not be what you're supposed to be doing either. So it's given me that kind of perspective now on, people can be good people. They just might not have even the strength or courage to be the person you need them to be.
That you need them to be. Yeah. Oh, girl, that's so big. That's so big. And you're right. And we have to separate that from, because we can't take it personally, because it really may have something to do with you. I mean, I'm sure there was some purpose, kiss my butt kind of moments, but there were some people probably who were just as nice and sweet and really love you and really would maybe even behind closed doors were rooting for you, but they couldn't get in front of that door and do what you felt like you needed or wanted them to do. Just couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that those are some of the disappointing things. Not a disappointment in those people, but a disappointing thing. And then, but again, in challenges, I just think that, there are still challenges for us as Black women to be bold, to stand in our power, to be unapologetic about who we are. And then realize that even people who, part of our standing up is elevating the entire community, but because it's not what they're used to, or because it makes them uncomfortable or whatever, that they don't like that. And so I think that's challenging. And Nada and I had that conversation, because even in this day and age when, as Black women, we're, people want us to save the world, but from behind a Black man.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I remember, and full transparency, I did some work with you and for you for the campaign. I remember editing a commercial where a guy, I don't even know who it was, said the only reason why people don't want to vote for her is because she's a Black woman. I mean, that was so poignant. This is a Black man saying, and he wasn't saying necessarily that he felt that way, but he was saying she's done the work, she's put in her time. Y'all just don't want to vote for her because she's a Black woman or she's a woman. And that was just like, wow, really? Because as you said, you look at the power of Black women in our families, in our communities, in our churches. So the leadership qualities are definitely there, but we are the least represented in public office.
Absolutely.
And in corporate America, for that matter.
Yep.
Yeah, Tameika Isaac Devine joins us. She is an attorney in Columbia, South Carolina, longtime elected public official. Recently, has it been 2 years now, ran for mayor of the city of Columbia, South Carolina. And I don't want to say unsuccessfully, because although she did not win that position, life has certainly been quite successful post election. I want to talk about after the election, Tameika. I mean, you had already had a full life. You're a wife, you're an attorney, you're a mom of 3. What happened after the election? What was your mindset, and what did, because I'm sure you were hurt and disappointed. I'll tell you a quick little story. The night of election night, and the numbers were going great, we're all cheering and ready, and then something just turned. It just turned, and I never forget, somebody, I think it was Bree Maxwell, said to me, Trey, can you come backstage? Tameika wants to talk to you, or whatever. So I came backstage, I looked at you, and I immediately went to hug you, and you just did like that. And I walked away, and I remember someone said, something disparaging, or that was just, I was like, no, she wasn't ready. And in that moment, I felt like if you would hug me, you may have broken down right at that moment. But yeah. So I want to find out from you, how did you shift your mindset? Because sometimes disappointments can put us in a place where we just can't move on for a long time. I mean, it's hurt. When you get hurt, you're hurt. And it's hard to then revamp and just to get yourself back together and back on track. So for so many people who have been there, done that, and still trying to get it done, how were you able to do that, Tameika?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, and it was like, if people hug me, I'm going to break down and just cry. And it was so funny because even when I did my concession speech, I was well, and then I cried a little bit, and then, I was like, let me end this. Yeah. And then we immediately went to the bathroom, and I literally cried for probably 10 minutes. I mean, straight, like, boohoo, the ugly cry.
Yeah, you had to get it out. That's toxic. Tears is toxic. Yeah. You had to get it out.
It is. And so, but yes, so immediately, immediately from that, after that 10-minute cry, I was okay. And I went out, met with my team, thanked my team. We took pictures, did an interview, that kind of stuff. And then we were staying at the hotel, went to the hotel. And I took that next day off, and literally I prayed. I mean, a lot of your viewers may know this, some may not, because I know you have an international following. So people who don't know me probably don't know this part of my story. But in 2014, I lost a child, and I remember when we lost James Henry. I mean, for months. I mean, I literally went into depression. But for months, I would stay in the bed, and all I would do is listen to gospel music. And I remember through that, I text Jamal Bates from the radio show. And I told him, I've been to you because I help for me.
Oh, that was so nice.
Of a lot of those songs that helped me through that time. So fast forward to 2021, when we lost that election, that next day, I took the kids to school, and then my husband did some errands, and I stayed home, and I put that CD on, and I just prayed, and I said, God, I know that there is a lesson in this, and I know that there's more out there. You are directing me. Please, reveal what that is. And so all I did really that first day was pray and meditate and everything else. And then the next day, that Thursday, was Vista Lights, which I always went to. And I was determined. I'm like, look, people are not going to see me disappear. They're not going to feel like, they have broken me. I didn't win this race, but I'm not broken. Right. And so I'm going out.
And I'm still a member of this community.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I went out that Thursday, and I remember several people commented like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're out." I'm like, "Yes, I'm here."
Right. I didn't have a car accident. I'm okay. I didn't die.
And so that was that immediate week. And then the next couple of weeks were just, woosah, like just get past this. And then in January, I declared 2022 as my year of intention. And so I started off by making a list of things that I felt were ways that I could learn more about myself and who I was, living with intention. Because as you mentioned, I mean, 20 years, I mean, I was the first elected at 29.
Yeah.
You know, I was turning 50 in 2022. So 20 years is almost half of my life.
Yeah.
All of my adult life.
Life. Yeah.
And so I felt like I needed to know who Tameika was without being councilwoman. And I needed to really take some time to meditate and pray on what that next session and season of my life looked like. So last year was my year of intention. I went skydiving. I went swimming with the dolphins. I spent a lot more time in my morning routine of getting up with prayer and meditation. I was intentional about developing relationships or reconnecting relationships that may have just drifted because I was doing something else and other people had lives as well. And so I was very intentional about just being me and seeing where God wanted me. So I had an amazing year and culminated it by turning 50 last year and really deciding that the next phase of my life, whatever it is, that the biggest thing is that I needed to recognize that change is part of that. Disappointments are part of that, but that everything that God presents to you, you have to be grateful for it, because even in the things that could be disappointing are making you part of who He needs you to be for that next season. And although great things have happened, I'm currently in a fellowship at Harvard, the inaugural fellowship of Power, Innovation, and Leadership. This is the first time Harvard has done a fellowship exclusively for Black women in leadership. And so this has been an extraordinary opportunity to meet Black women who are leading in corporate and public service and social action and doing those things. I'm working as political action committee chair for the NAACP, trying to make sure that I use my experience as an elected official to help empower our community to understand not just about voting, but how do we advocate and make sure that laws and people who are empowered to make those laws, whether they look like us or don't, are doing their jobs. I've spent more time with my family. And so that's all what I've been doing. But I also realized that, what my next is probably is not even here yet, but all these things God is things. And so that's what that year of intention has been about. And so now this year is my year of abundance. I'm gratefully in expectation of the abundance that God has given me. And abundance is not just financial. It means, abundance of love, abundance of time, abundance of peace, because so often we don't even have peace in what we're doing. And so I can actually say that every single day I am looking around and just saying, thank you, God, because I'm grateful of all the experiences that He's given me and all the relationships. And so that's been my way of dealing with the change and embracing it and just being open to where that change may look like in God's plan, knowing that may not have been my plan, but His plan is always more amazing and abundant than we could ever expect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oprah has a quote. You were saying it and I remembered it. God can dream a bigger dream for you than you could ever dream for yourself. And I've always, remembered that and kept that with me during times when, as you say, we question, what God is doing in our lives. We've got to realize, listen, Julius, my 7-year-old, he just said to me the other day, we were talking about the resurrection and, he was asking me, why would God sacrifice His son? And he said, you know what, Tutu? He said, that's not something I would do. He said, but I'm not God. He said, that's not what I would do, but I'm not God. I said, you're right, honey. And we can't, the word says His ways are not our ways. Our thoughts are not our thoughts. So how you cope with it. One thing you would say is kind of getting more spiritually connected. Would that be one of the ways that you've coped with this change in your life?
Absolutely. And you have to do what works for you,
Right.
and everybody has a different, God that they worship. And so
Yes, yes,
whatever
yes.
that reconnection looks like for you is what you need to do.
I agree.
But absolutely. I mean, if it weren't for my faith and understanding that we have to trust God, I just don't know I would have made it through, even though I had the amazing support with my husband and my kids and my mom and, my sister circle. I had amazing support, and I'm always grateful for that. But, if it weren't for having faith to know, like, okay, God, I know I can't see what it is right now, but I trust you. and when you tell me and reveal what it is, I'm ready. I'm gonna be ready. That has helped a lot. And it's helped me to actually even be open to jumping out of a plane and stuff like
Right.
that. To realize that we have boundaries that we give ourselves, and we have
Yeah.
restrictions that we put around ourselves. But you got to release those things so that more things can open up for you.
Can you give me one or two more ways that you have coped with the change, so someone else could maybe, take from how you transitioned, and maybe some things they could do in their life? One was spirituality. What else?
Mhm. Another is, I think, just recognizing. So I mentioned, I was councilwoman for 20 years. And it's hard when you're in something so long to see how you are without that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so whether that change is, no longer in a position, it could mean a divorce, it could mean a death of a loved one.
Right.
We go through those things, and sometimes we tie our identity to
Yes,
these other things.
yes.
And so part of my coping was recognizing that not having that title, not having that position didn't change who I
Yes,
was.
yes, yes.
And that wasn't part of my identity. It was just a position I held. And so for me, and part of this fellowship has been amazing, because part of it is, I said, it's called Power, Innovation, and Leadership. And we talk about sources of power and where people derive their sources of power, and how power is very misunderstood, in that people think that power comes with position or money or title or that kind of thing. But power really comes from your ability to affect change.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is, as a councilwoman, I had an ability to affect change through legislative processes and providing resources. As an attorney, I'm able to affect change by empowering my clients to deal with whatever legal situation they have, and do things there. As a community advocate, and particularly as a Black woman, my power comes from within, and my ability to help support other people and to bring information to a situation and work together with folks. So I've actually realized that I am who I am, regardless of these other external things. And so I think that's one thing, is a tip for folks, is recognizing who you are, and of course whose you are, and that no change in your circumstance, whether that is losing a job, losing a loved one, a divorce, or an illness, those are things that don't change who you are.
Mhm.
You just may have to adjust how you deal with certain situations.
Yeah, and how you do what you do, because I would even say that council really kind of held your hands back to some things that you are now able to do that you couldn't do had you been mayor, or had you still been on council, would you say?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. We talk about that at Harvard. And I've done more with my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. And we were at Delta Days at the nation's capital. And we were talking about advocacy. And I told somebody, I said, you know what? As mayor, there are some of these things that I couldn't be out there saying.
Right.
But now, I can say it unapologetically and not feel, be tied by that. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, you said that best. It's God always has a plan, and it may not be a straight shot to that, or it may not make sense to us at the time. And I realized that, although I truly wanted to be mayor, and again, know that if it's God's will, it will happen in the time that He believes it should happen, or any other position. But I also know that I've been able to say, okay, Tameika, this issue is important to you. You no longer have, the city PR department to help you bring attention on this, or you no
Yeah.
longer have the city budget to help you do this program. But how do you do that without those things? And so I've
Right.
been doing that. I didn't
Right.
even mention I started a nonprofit, and we're taking baby steps right now because I'm making sure that we're very thoughtful in what we do in the community. But my nonprofit has been, out there working with young people and doing some things. And those are some things that I was doing. All I had to do is say, hey, I want to do this. And the check was written and the organization was done and all that because I had the city. I'm actually like, how do I still do those things without, like you said, those hand holding?
Yeah.
And, the folks who are doing work in our community, they don't always have that. And so how do you get that done? And so it's actually given me more ability to do those things and depend on me and myself and my own resources to do those things. So that's been empowering as well.
Yeah. I want you to give us one more way you've coped. And I kind of want to ask you if you can talk about one thing in particular that we've talked about before, which is connections and people and making impactful and meaningful relationships. Because wouldn't you say that's been another way you've been able to cope through the relationships that you've had to make?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started my year of intention, and people would say, well, what does that mean? Is that just a hashtag? No, it was how I plan to live this next phase of my life with intention, intentional about what I do and how I do it, intentional on how I spend my time and who I spend my
Oh,
time with.
yeah, yeah,
And I realized that in order to get us through anything, we have to have real authentic connections with people. We live in a society that, it's all about social media and texting, and, we really don't have relationships like we used to.
yeah,
And so I felt like it was really important that I was very intentional on these relationships as well, not only to help me whatever with what God has next, but also to help ground me and keep me centered around who I am. And
yeah,
so I've been very intentional. I have a best friend. We've been best friends for 40 years. But literally, while I was in counsel, and to the point, I mean, she would even say, well, when she went through her first bout of cancer, I didn't know about it for weeks. And she's like, because you're busy and I just didn't want to bother you.
wow,
Um,
yeah,
there's a problem when your best friend doesn't feel like they can tell you they have cancer
yeah,
because they feel like you're too busy. And so that was a rude awakening for me. And so I was very intentional about like, these are relationships, these are people, these have been my girls since we were 10 years old.
yeah,
So there should
yeah,
never be a reason why they feel like I'm busy. So we're intentional about spending time together. Just like I mentioned with you, I mean, there are folks, we're all busy, but sometimes we're too busy. And so, like, how do
yeah,
we have those intentional connections with people that help ground you, but can also help you see very intentional, and that's continuing. So although that was my year of intention, I'm continuing. This was the new way, and so I'm intentional there with my fellowship with Harvard. These have been amazing women
I'm
that I've
sure.
only known for 3 months, but we text, we have a group chat, and we're on there, and we're talking all the time, and we're supporting each other in what we're doing. And those intentional connections have helped me meet other people that will likely be folks that when I do my next are helping me there. So I think it's very important that we're intentional on making authentic, and I want to stress that authentic connections,
Yeah,
because especially with social media, there are so many very, um, uh, very, I don't want to say advice. I don't know what word to use, but very superficial
yeah,
connections
yeah, yeah,
that you might feel are authentic, but they're really not, because you're not really connecting with people outside of what they're posting on social media. And so I am very intentional about having authentic connections with people that are like-minded people and that who understand the importance of faith, the importance of family, the importance of community connections and involvement. And so that's been part of me, and that actually helps me more. I even with people than the people that I might be helping, because it helps me stay grounded, but it also helps me realize that, when I am having a challenge about a particular issue, that these authentic connections can help me think through that. And this, I mean, people know this, I lost a very dear friend in December. I miss him every day. But one of the things that he always talked about was,
Vince Ford. We'll just say Vince Ford.
Vince Ford. One of the things he would always talk about is, when you go home and the lights are off, and and you don't have that title, and you don't have that position, and you don't have that money, wake up and see who's there. Yeah. And those are the folks that are going to have your back. And I think that's what's happened to me, that the authentic connections I have been there regardless of me no longer being a councilwoman. And that's been eye-opening as well. It's like, who's here? Who's really here now? Yeah. And I think that helps you for that next.
Yeah. Tameika Isaac Devine has been chatting with us today about coping with change and how she has navigated her life after 20 years as an elected public servant, after running for mayor and not attaining that title, and how she has coped with those changes and cope with being intentional, and how she has coped with moving on to her next. If you have just joined us, you have missed an amazing conversation. So please hit the replay button and listen and hear everything that Tameika has shared with us, so that you too can effectively and successfully cope with the changes in your life. Because as we say, we're always coping with something. Tameika, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, just for being open and honest, for being transparent, and for sharing your heart, as you always have, actually.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me share. And thank you for what you're doing, because I think it is so important that we have these conversations. And I'll just say briefly, because I know we've got to go, but I mentioned to you offline, I have a really good friend that's dealing with depression right now. Yeah. And actually, I know about 4 women, strong women, that are dealing with depression right now at different levels. But this friend has actually realized it's gotten so bad, she's been inpatient. And so she's in inpatient facility. And there's so many times that because we're strong, because people perceive us as strong, we don't deal with things and then until it all boils over. And so you're right. We're always coping with something. And I just hope that something I've said has at least triggered something in somebody to know that, things can happen and they can be disappointing. They may not happen the way they want. It may be a change that you didn't expect, and that you feel like, how am I going to get through this? But you've got to figure out what that coping mechanism is, whether that could be professional help. It could be having that authentic connections with other people. It could be, your own personal retreat and meditation, but we're all coping with something. And I commend you for continuing this platform, because I know folks are like, well, COVID's over. And so you could have easily said COVID's over, so coping is over. But you realize that there's such an amazing space to have these conversations. Yes. So I want to thank you for doing this, and thank you for allowing me to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Tameika. I appreciate it. And you're right. What you said was so true. We all have different ways of coping. You just got to find something that works for you, because you will find something to work, and then you'll come out better and more and with more purpose on the other side. So don't be afraid or ashamed to figure out whatever that is that works for you. Tameika Isaac Devine, y'all, thank you so much, beautiful, for joining us today. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. So listen, if you have a story or initiative that could help someone cope, please email booking@copingwithtretatailor.com. We would love to feature your story or initiative. If you have a product or service that could help someone cope, we would love for you to be a proud sponsor. Please email copingwithtretatailor@gmail.com. Our sponsors include Palmetto Media Connections, Javis Financial Services, the Comet Bus System, the South Carolina State Fair, Agape Counseling and Training Services, In It Together SC, DHEC, and also Computers Unique Dutch Square Mall. Coming up next, our devotional. That's next on Coping. I'm Tre Tailor.
Computers, they're a part of our everyday lives, but when they're not working, they're an everyday problem. So call Computers Unique, your everyday solution. 803-351-5821. Is your computer running slow? Won't turn on? Do you need a screen replaced? Or maybe you just need another computer? Well, Computers Unique is your one-stop shop for all your computer needs. They have a wide variety of new and pre-owned PCs, Macs, and tablets. So call Computers Unique, Dutch Square Mall. 803-351-5821. 803-351-5821.
Hi, I'm Tre Tailor. We'll always be coping with something, but God is always with us. Today's devotion says, when something in your life or thoughts make you anxious, come to me and talk to me. Thank you, Jesus, for this opportunity to trust you more. That's what we should say. Though the lessons of trust that I send you come wrapped with difficulties, the benefits far outweigh the cost. Well-developed trust will bring you many blessings, not the least of which is my peace. I have promised to keep you in perfect peace to the extent that you trust in me. The world has it backwards, teaching that peace is the result of having enough money, possessions, insurance, security systems. But my peace, God says, is such an all-encompassing gift that it's independent of all circumstances. Though you lose everything else, if you gain my peace, you are rich indeed. That's your devotional for today.
Coping, find peace of mind to survive through whatever. Coping, learning the way that we thrive all together. Coping, finding out what's real. Coping, we can heal, we can heal, we can heal. Coping with stress, coping with strife, bringing hope for success, for improving our life. Coping beyond hoping to do more than survive, ways to live a healthy life. Coping and promoting, learning what you can do, 6 ways to a better you. Coping, find peace of mind to survive